On Saturday, June 11th, 1977, Terry Lovelace peeked out of his tent and he saw what he thought was a group of children scuffling in the clearing. And that didn't make any sense. He was deep in the woods. What would a group of kids be doing this far out in the woods? And then he remembered they weren't children. They weren't even human. Lately, whistleblowers keep coming forward, telling us that extraterrestrials are here. And the Pentagon keeps officially denying that that's true, stating that there just really isn't any proof. All the while, ordinary people all over the world keep coming out of the woodwork claiming that they've had personal encounters with aliens, and just about all of them are terrifying. One of the earliest abduction stories is the very popular Betty and Barney Hill story. In 1961, they saw a bright light moving in the sky as they were driving home. They followed the light for a while and then stopped to use binoculars. Barney said that he saw some strange beings inside of a disc-shaped craft and then quickly got back into his car and drove home. Later, the couple discovered that they were missing 2 hours of time. Shortly after that, they began having terrifying nightmares of being taken onto a strange alien spaceship and experimented on by non-human entities. Since then, there have been literally thousands of reported abductions from people all over the world. In this video, we're going to consider the possibility that alien abductions are real and they're nefarious. And we'll do this by following the story of Terry Lovelace. He's a man who claims that he's been abducted his entire life. For years, he had bizarre memories, but they weren't of alien abductions. At least, at first, he didn't think so. Then, one horrifying event at Devil's Den State Park grabbed the attention of the military, who began digging into Terry's mind. We'll first share his bizarre memories, the ones he had in his childhood and his early years. Then we'll share the details of this terrifying abduction where he says that he came face to face with an insect type of creature that rendered him powerless and manipulated his body in painful, torturous ways. And then stay with us for our Fact or Fiction segment. There, I'm going to give you my thoughts on this case. And then Amy is going to come on and she's going to share information on different organizations who offer support for people like Terry who have gone through abductions. So this story begins in between archery shots. It was a cloudless spring day with an occasional breeze, making it feel just perfect. It was almost kite-flying weather, and summer vacation was just around the corner. 8-year-old Terry Lovelace was in the backyard shooting arrows into a block of hay. He was proud of himself. This was an adult bow and arrow set for target practice. While loading an arrow onto his bowstring, Terry saw a dark, shadowy figure moving across the grass.
I assumed it was a cloud, but the shadow made a perfect circle.
Terry looked up.
There was a large, silver disc-shaped object directly over my head. I was confused and wondered what it was. It wasn't an airplane or a helicopter. Perhaps it was a balloon?
Terry wondered what type of balloon could be made of aluminum or silver. He also wondered why it didn't move. It was sitting perfectly still, unaffected by the breeze. He estimated that it was probably about 20 meters up.
For some odd reason, I felt compelled to put down my bow and lie down on the freshly mowed lawn and stare up at the thing for a better view. In hindsight, of course, that made no sense. But that's what I did, and that still puzzles me to this day.
Later, Terry recalled thinking that it was amazing and beautiful.
It was shiny and gorgeous, in the way a brand new sports car is gorgeous. Its edges curled upward, but otherwise it was perfectly flat, like a pancake. I remember being disappointed that I couldn't see the top of it. I wanted to see if there were windows. On the bottom, there were no openings or doorways of any kind, no seams or rivets. There wasn't an exhaust pipe. There was nothing printed on it, I expected to see USAF or even CCCP printed on the bottom, but there were no insignias or numbers. The bottom was one seamless piece of shiny metal.
This silver disc hung in the sky, perfectly quiet and perfectly still for no less than 10 minutes. As Terry studied it, he noticed a strange electrical charge building up all around him. It got so strong that the air began to taste metallic. He also noted that all of the other sounds around him began to fade away, and this was odd. His neighborhood always had children and other people that could be heard from every direction, but right now, there was no sounds at all. Then, after about 10 minutes or so, the disc just shot up into the sky like a bullet. And as soon as it was out of sight, all of the energy that had built up around him dissipated. And then all the sounds of the neighborhood returned. Just 3 years after seeing that strange silver disc in the sky, when Terry was 11, he witnessed another extraordinary event. His mother tucked him into bed, and he quickly fell asleep. Then sometime during the night, a loud hum woke him up.
I opened my eyes and found I was already sitting upright in my bed. It was in the middle of the night, and there were these brilliant multicolored lights shining through the curtains. I could tell that they weren't automotive headlights, and they weren't emergency lights from a fire truck or a police car either. Oddly, I almost felt disinterested. There was an odd noise too, a pulsating hum. It wasn't as much loud as it was powerful. I could feel it in my chest like a bass guitar note on a giant amplifier.
As Terry sat in the middle of his bed, his entire room vibrated, causing the model airplanes on his desk to dance. And then one fell to the floor. Although he was slightly curious, Terry said that he was also strangely apathetic as well. This struck me as odd. If anything like that had happened to me when I was 11, my mind would have been blown, but not Terry. I spoke to Terry on the phone about this, and he said that much later, when he was an adult, he learned that these beings have a way to calm one's mood, taking away any concerns during a traumatic event like that. And then somehow, they can also change the way that one remembers these events. Terry sat in his bed, just feeling that hum and watching that light for a while, and then he felt a strange compulsion to go to the window.
Despite my disinterest, I felt compelled to look out the window. I don't know what I expected to see, but I wasn't afraid. I got off the bed and walked to the window, pulled back the drapes, and peeked through the blinds.
Just outside of his second-floor window was a floating silver disc.
It was shrouded in a heavy fog that was coming from beneath it. It was hovering over the front lawn just a few feet outside of my window. It looked just like the one I saw in 1963, except this time I could see the top. There was a dome that was the source of the lights.
Terry pulled back the curtains, perhaps to get a better view, or maybe as a gesture inviting someone or something into his room. And then he walked back to his bed, intending to watch the disc as it rotated outside of his window, but suddenly, it was morning.
The morning was a weird experience too. It was as if I had just laid down, blinked, and it was dawn. I had no dreams. As soon as my eyes opened, it was morning and I was fully awake and alert.
Instead of being terrified by last night's memory, Terry was excited by the fact that he had seen a UFO outside of his window. However, that feeling wouldn't last. Later, he would find out that these beings were not his friends, and they hadn't just started appearing when he was 8. I began this report by telling you that Terry had woken up in his tent at Devil's Den State Park and he had mistaken those short alien beings for children. But what I didn't tell you was that was right after he had been abducted. See, he was groggy and he didn't remember. He was now an adult and he was a sergeant in the military. The night before, he and a friend, Toby, left the base for a camping weekend getaway. And being adventurous, they had actually set up their tent in a restricted area of this wildlife preserve in Washington County, Arkansas. Devil's Den. Terry shifted on his air mattress to look past Toby, who was already peeking out of the tent towards some very bright lights. When he finally saw out into the clearing, and he saw those aliens that he had mistaken for children, terrifying and disconnected images flashed in and out of his mind, like a traumatic PTSD event. As he was trying to make sense of this flood of information, he moved forward and he lay down beside Toby and he peered out of the tent. Hanging in the sky, weightlessly, was a huge triangle-shaped craft that was about 30 feet off the ground.
We could see two sides clearly. There were randomly dispersed square panels of light on each side. It reminded me of a 5-story office building at night, with windows lit here and there on every floor. Along the very top was a row of larger windows that slanted outward. They were all lit. I saw faint shadows of movement behind these larger panels.
Terry said that the craft was quiet, except for this low hum that he could feel down in his chest. The two men laid on their stomachs in fear, peering out of the tent. There were dozens of these child-sized beings out there. Then Terry turned around and looked through the little screen at the rear of the tent.
These beings were behind us, too. The entire forest was dimly lit, and there were long shadows moving around. The sight unnerved me, and I did not want to get out of the tent.
Then, suddenly, an intensely bright light, about 30 feet in diameter, shone down from the center of the craft, and it lit the entire area up. And when it did, as if in unison, like they were part of a hive mind, all of these strange beings just immediately stopped what they were doing and headed to the light.
All these beings walked into the light. They just dissolved, disappearing, 2 or 3 at a time.
The two men watched as the very last of these beings vanished, and then that huge object rose into the sky and disappeared into the night. And for just a moment, there was a strange feeling of emptiness. And then Terry noticed his boots. They were haphazardly hanging on his feet. And when he took them off, he saw that his socks were on sideways. And then it hit him. A rush of memories and powerful emotions flooded his brain as he began to form clearer pictures of what had actually happened just moments earlier. Sometime after he had went to sleep, but before he had woken up to those gray aliens that he had mistaken for children, there had been a steady intensifying hum. And then suddenly, the tent was filled with a brilliantly white light. And as this light shone into the tent, Terry said that he felt himself being pulled away by the center of his being with like a bizarre twirling sensation. And the next thing that he knew, he was standing in a foreign, yet somehow familiar place.
It was huge. Everything was white or stainless steel. This made everything very bright inside. The walls and even the ceiling reflected light. There were what looked to be flying saucers. They were aligned in a neat row at the far side. We could see walkways in different levels with unrecognizable symbols etched into the walls. We were not the only humans. There were at least 50 other people with us.
Later, over the phone, Terry told Amy and I that ever since this experience, he had always wondered who those people were. Where did they come from and whatever happened to them? Did they leave with the ship? Were they even still alive? Terry told us that he felt very fortunate to be alive, but he also felt some kind of guilt, maybe like survivor's guilt. On the craft, Terry was standing next to Toby in a line next to these other abductees. At the end of the line, small groups of people were being taken away, and the line was moving forward. As he was walking, he began looking at everything. He said that the place was enormous, and it was filled with dozens, maybe hundreds of those little gray aliens. They all went from one task to another with no apparent conscious thought, kind of like a group of synchronized biological entities. Then Terry noticed something odd, even for this place. Not far from where he was standing was a handful of human men, Earthlings. These men did not appear to be detained, and they were moving freely. Terry said that they were all dressed in some sort of military uniform. And check this out. Terry said that it was clear they were working with the aliens. And then Terry saw another species, but this one was unlike any that he had seen so far. As Terry was taking it all in, an alien of a different race walked by. This one didn't act like one of those small little drones, and it definitely wasn't human. It stood about 6 foot tall with pinkish skin. And when it made eye contact with Terry, it was instantly inside of Terry's head, with Terry, sharing Terry's thoughts and his feelings. Then, as Terry was trying to make sense of this, it moved even deeper, probing Terry's entire life. Having this being inside of Terry's head with Terry was like sharing his brain with another entity. This alien knew Terry's friends, his family, his deepest fears, all of his current thoughts, and somehow it even knew the thoughts that Terry was going to think before Terry thought them. And the crazy part was this entire encounter took maybe 2 seconds. And then Terry looked away, and this far superior being just moved on past, as if this was just routine. Not long after this, the line shortened, and they took him and the men around him out of this big open area and down this long hall. One of the walls along this corridor was made up of several aquariums that were filled with a strange pink fluid. As Terry walked past, he could see that there was something alive in the fluid.
I thought they were puppies at first, but they weren't. Then I thought they were some type of reptilian lizard-like things. They were ugly with big eyes. Halfway down the hall, one of the eyes twitched, and then I could tell you what they were. They were some type of deformed human beings.
Terry said that at that moment he felt physically ill, but before he could fully process what he had just seen, he was picked up and placed on an examination table.
These beings looked like insects, like praying mantises. They stripped all my clothes off, and some invisible force held me to the table as they used all sorts of strange tools on me. Razor-sharp pieces of metal like knives, long skinny needles, and other torturous devices. And all the while, as I screamed in pain, they showed absolutely no empathy whatsoever, acting as if what they were doing was business as usual.
While Terry was there, he remembered that he had been there dozens of times throughout his life, and each time one of these torture sessions were over, they would somehow hide the memory of what had just happened, so later on he would have no recollection that he had ever been there. After some time, this praying mantis type of alien leaned over, and with a long, bony insect-like appendage, it poked Terry in the forehead and said, "Go to sleep." Shortly after this is when Terry woke up foggy-headed in that tent, thinking that those were children out there in that clearing. And as if things weren't already bad enough, before long, Terry would have to deal with the military trying to dig into his brain and extract these memories. This abduction at Devil's Den wasn't the end of the story for Terry. In many ways, it was really the beginning. Before this experience, Terry wasn't able to recall all of the times that he had been taken, and they had been taking him repeatedly his entire life. Each time that they returned him, he wouldn't remember that he had been taken at all. And even though he did have those flashbacks in the tent just after his encounter at Devil's Den, very quickly those memories began to fade from his mind as well. But this event at Devil's Den somehow got the attention of his supervisors, and Terry suffered countless sessions where he was debriefed. Finally, not at all satisfied with his poor recollections, the military brought in a psychological specialist who used drugs and hypnosis to pull these terrifying memories to the surface. Sadly, after this was done, Terry could no longer forget the horrors that had happened to him, and he developed all sorts of psychological problems, from reoccurring nightmares to severe bouts of PTSD. And to make matters worse, the military told him that he better keep quiet or else. Well, to make a long story short, several years passed, and then years turned into decades. And as Terry got older, the pressure from the military lightened up, and eventually it stopped altogether. And after years of contemplation, Terry finally decided that he was going to come forward with his story, and the powers that be be damned. He thought it was more important that the world know the truth. In 2018, he published Incident at Devil's Den. After reading the book, we contacted Terry and we had several long phone calls gathering more information. There's actually a lot more to Terry's story, and if you would like to dive deeper into it, we'll leave a link in the description below. Terry's nightmare isn't over, and if his story is true, it may never be over. As recently as 2017, while Terry was getting ready to release his book, he was once again visited by a non-human entity, and this one gave him a warning about the government.
Hi, my name is Terry Lovelace. I'm the author of Incident at Devil's Den. In 2017, as I was preparing to publish my book on Amazon, I was visited by a non-human entity that I refer to as Betty. And Betty spoke with me telepathically in my home. I asked her why she was in my living room. She said she wanted to tell me that my government would not be pleased if I published my book and tell all the details that I told.
This story has got to be one of the more intense alien abduction accounts that we've reported on so far. And if it's true, at least for me, it brings up all types of questions. Who's doing these abductions? Why are they doing this? How long has this been going on? Decades? Hundreds of years? Thousands of years? And if so, well, why would they have to keep looking at our anatomy? Wouldn't they already know what our anatomy looks like by now? Or maybe we're some type of an experiment that they created maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, and these abductions are really nothing more than them just genetically tweaking their experiment. Amy spent countless hours on the phone talking to Terry, and Terry sounded really sincere. But several parts of his story, he kind of choked up and he had a hard time sharing. And that made Amy wonder just what type of support groups might be out there for people who have gone through the type of ordeal that Terry has. That channel was brand new.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of cool.
I know.
So what do you have for us today?
Well, I thought about the different abduction stories that we've looked into, and I wondered what kind of supports are out there for people who've had these experiences.
Right.
Well, the first one I came across is called MUFON. I'm sure our viewers know what MUFON is, right? The Mutual UFO Network. And it really started back in May of 1969, just collecting reports of UFO sightings. That's what they were doing. Well, now they have expanded tremendously. They're in all 50 states, 43 countries, and still growing. Wow. And they have added this new program called ERT, Experiencer Resource Team. Yeah. And so if someone has an alien abduction experience, they can contact this team. There are physicians, there are psychiatrists, and all kinds of other resources that they can access as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's great. But then I found there's one that was started in I think it was 94 by a man named Les Velez, and it's called Opus. And that one is the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. That one is huge as well. They, again, have doctors, all sorts of resources, but it's not just for people who've been abducted by aliens. It's anyone who's had a paranormal experience and wants to reach out.
And been affected by it.
Right. Yeah.
I never thought of that. So, it's silly of me not to have thought about that, but like, the last week, we did a report on the Black Hope Cemetery. So those poor people went through some traumatic stuff, right? Lost their daughter.
Yeah.
So
really
this
did.
Opus would be available to them as a resource.
Right.
Is what you're saying. Is that right?
Right.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then one that I found, it's a more grassroots, but I feel like the story is really interesting. So this one was started in 2006. These twin sisters, Debbie and Audrey Hewins, started a support group called Starborn. So these twin sisters had been abducted their whole lives. And they reached out to MUFON and some other organizations. And they felt like, yes, there's help out there, but they wanted something more intimate, right? They wanted a smaller group. So what did they do? They started their own. And they have groups. I think the last time I looked, it's 12 different chapters of Starborn, and they're also in 3 other countries besides the United States.
Wow.
Right. And what they do is they have kind of almost like monthly small group meetings where people who've had alien abduction experiences can get together. Sometimes they go on hikes, and they have conversations
Right.
and really support each other.
It's kind of hard to know what someone that's been through that has experienced and felt, unless you've done it. So if you get together with other like-minded people that have been through the same thing, you can kind of relate and not feel alone.
That's exactly what they say. And they also go to different conferences and reach out, and they let people know, we have this group and it's Starborn, and you are welcome.
Yeah.
If you want to, sign up and become a member. I think it's all free. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, as I always do, I'm going to ask you, what do you think really is going on with this story? Do you think there's some validity to it?
I think there's absolutely validity to it. I, not only spoke with him just over the phone, but then I got to FaceTime with him. And when you're doing that, you see the person's face, right? You see their different emotions. And he is so genuine. Absolutely genuine. And that really struck me, as it didn't feel at all like this was something he was making up. He was very sincere. Even got choked up at times.
Yeah.
Because what he related to us.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing.
No. So can you imagine laying down, you're locked to a bed, and there's like a praying mantis kind of creature. We see stuff like this in horror films and in sci-fis.
Right.
So we're kind of desensitized to it. But if this really happened to you and there's an insect above you doing things to you, can you imagine?
That's hard for me to imagine how terrifying it would be. Right.
Yeah.
I think it would be terrifying if I was like at a hospital or something and it was humans that I didn't know and why they were doing this. But then we're talking about creatures I don't recognize.
Yeah.
I absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Well,
so
thank you again.
You're welcome.
So, what do you think? Could Terry really have went through all of the things that he claimed? This story reminds me of what happened to a lady named Jerry. Her story is terrifying. Just like with this story, she too had been abducted her entire life, tortured, and her memories suppressed. But unlike this story, she was impregnated with alien DNA, and more than once. Her story is intense. We did a complete report on it, and if you'd like to see it, it's here.
There's just one more thing that I want to go over with you. That's good. Just lean in close, really get close to the screen, seriously. And if you would just look right here, there you go. Now, listen, you did not just watch a video about Terry Lovelace. You didn't watch a video about Devil's Den.
You did not subscribe, and you do not know anything about this channel.